What's going on, everybody? Jesse here, and welcome back to another episode. Today, we're going to continue where we left off in the last one. We're going to start creating our inventory components, some base items, some inventory item structs, and some good lessons going on in this one. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. All right, so we're going to go ahead and create a few C++ classes, and then we'll go in there and we'll spend a little bit of time in there. So go ahead and open up your content browser. I'm going to come down here into my plugins folder and C++ classes. And in here, I'm going to right click and go create new class. I'm going to come over to actor component. We're going to create our inventory component. And what I'm going to do with this, I'm actually not going to link this up to the existing blueprint like we did with the player character. Actually, in my advanced project, I don't even have a blueprint variant of this inventory component. So I'm going to probably just not do it that way, but we will still use that to help us design the code for the C++. All right, so actor component, next. And in here, I'm just going to name this inventory component. We need to put this into our plugin, which for me is the TPG inventory system. We need to put that into its runtime. And for here, I'm going to create a new folder at the end of this. And I'm going to call this components. That should be good. Go ahead and create class. Now, once it loaded, you can see here we have the error again, just because we put it into a different folder. I'm going to go ahead and delete this. This is off of the CPP, off the source file. There we go. Now we can build it and it'll update into the editor, but we got two more classes that I want to build really quick. So I'm going to head back into the editor. All right, I'm going to open up the content browser again. Again, you're not going to be able to see that here because we did not build it back because it had the build error when we sent it over there. So it doesn't show in here, but it will be there as soon as we build it from source. Okay, so I'm going to right click again, another C++ class. Now this time I'm going to go none. This is going to be for our inventory item struct. For the item struct, we're going to create a none class. We're actually going to delete the CPP. If you haven't seen how this is done, then go back and watch my fundamentals video on this. I'm going to select next. I'm going to call this one inventory item struct. Again, make sure it's in your plugin runtime. And I'm going to leave this as default. I'm not going to put this in a special folder or anything like this. It's just going to dump right in and be just fine. So go ahead and create class. And once that's done, it actually should end up building properly. We'll come back and we'll deal with this in a second. Let's go back to the editor. And now we're back in here. Go ahead and open your content browser one more time. Right click, new C++ class, open up all classes, select the base object, the very top one, object here. This is going to be our base item. Select next. I'm going to call this base item. Make sure it's in the plugins folder. And now I'm going to give this an additional folder structure of items and create class. Again, you'll be presented with this error. Just go ahead and open this up, remove the folder structure right there, and should be good. Let's go ahead and build it now. And if we look again into our editor, we should be able to see all of our files in there. We've got item, we got base item, and it doesn't show it here, but if you look back into C++, we do have the item struct in there. So let's go ahead and head back to the editor. All right, so first thing I want to do is I want to come over here to the primary character. I want to go ahead and create a component and put it onto the player character. We're going to create the new inventory component. We're going to attach it to the player. We'll leave the other one on there for now, but this one, I want to just go ahead and add this. So I'm in the header file, primary character, and in the private section, I'm going to go inventory component. That's the new component we just created, and we don't want to include it here, so forward declaration, make it a pointer, and we will call it inventory. And I'm going to initialize it as null, and then because it is a pointer, we need to give it a U property. I'm going to give it edit anywhere, blueprint read only, a category, character components. And then because it is in a private section, we need to give it a meta equal to allow private access equal true. There we go. Now let's go ahead and head into the source file of the primary character. And right here in the constructor of the primary character, I'm going to jump down and let's go ahead and take the inventory, and we are going to create default sub object. It's going to be a view inventory component, and you can see up there at the top it automatically included it for me, so make sure you include that here since we only forward declared it in the header. And I'm going to give it a name of inventory. There we go. We don't need to, unlike a lot of the other things we have to do when it comes to components, we don't actually have to attach it to the character like you would a mesh or a capsule or something like that. This in particular, this does not need that. So we're good with this. So we can go ahead and close out the primary character. And now let's head on over into, let's go work on our inventory item struct. All right, so we're going to end up going and revamping this, pretty much this entire thing. Let's open up the Explorer if it isn't already open. And I'm going to come over here to the private section where we have the inventory item struct CPP. We don't need that. I'm going to close this tab out up here so it's not up there, but I'm going to go ahead and delete this. And then for me, it's going to pop up. Do I want to auto remove it? I'm going to say yes, delete it. There we go. So now we just have the header file in here, and this definitely will not be seen in the editor now. But what we can do is we can make this so we can create other classes and variables from this. So we don't need this core minimal.h. I will create an inventory item struct.generated.h. And I don't think we actually need to add this. I think once we build it and run it, it'll actually automatically include this, but I'm going to type it in here just to make sure that it's always there. Delete this comment, and this will get deleted. I'm just going to create a little bit of space here, and we're just going to go use struct, and it's going to already populate this for us. If it doesn't do it for you, then just go ahead and copy what you see on the screen right here. And now that it populated it, I'm going to go ahead and delete this class right here. We don't need any of that original content. And now I'm going to rename this struct. It's going to be, it needs to start with an F. So make sure you have the F in there. And I'm going to call this one inventory item. And again, you can have multiple structs within the same header file here if you so choose. This one is just going to be for this, but that is something that you can do if you need to. And with this, I'm going to go inside the parentheses of the use struct, and I'm going to give it the identifier to be a blueprint type. In other words, we can take this and now we can actually do something within blueprints. You can make a variable and make it of this type. And I'm going to put it in a category equal to item information. And now with the struct, we need to create a constructor for it. So I'm going to go force inline and F inventory item, and there we go. It's going to give us the yellow squiggly line because it doesn't point to anything. We need a definition for it, but we'll do that in just a minute. So now if we look back at our original inventory item struct, in here you can see that we've got 4 different variables within this struct. The first is going to be an item, and this currently is set as a class BP base item. We're going to actually end up making this a soft class. It's going to be a little bit harder to work with initially, but this is really going to be the best way to go about doing this. So we're going to make this a soft class, and there's going to be some changes that you're going to see as we go through here, but I'll try to make note of those as we go through. But we're going to have the first variable here of BP base item. We're going to create another one for quantity, owning inventory, and index location. So let's jump back into the IDE. And now our first property needs to be a T soft class pointer, and it's going to be of U base item, and it's going to ask us what we want to do with it here. We're just going to do a forward declaration. We don't need it to be active here now. If we wanted to do some more constructors with it and do something special with it in here, then we could include it. It's a small file, so it doesn't really matter, but we're just going to forward declare it, and you can see it automatically added it for me at the top of the screen there. And then I'm going to call this base item. Next one, we're going to go int 32. I'm going to call this quantity, and I'm going to initialize it to 0. Next one, we're going to do the owning inventory. So U inventory component forward declare needs to be a pointer, and we're going to call this one owning inventory, and I'm going to initialize it as a null pointer. And lastly, we've got int 32. We're going to call this index, and equals -1 will be its default value. And there we go. So now it is good practice in here. Remember, inside a struct, if you haven't watched my fundamental, go ahead and watch it. Inside of a struct, nothing in here is automatically added to the reflection system, so we need to try to add everything when possible. So we're going to go U property. I'm going to give this one blueprint read write and edit anywhere. Come down to the quantity, and we're going to do U property, give it blueprint read write, edit anywhere. And then for the owning inventory, we're just going to give this one blueprint read only, and then nothing else. We just want to be able to use this inside there. We don't want to actually set this inside the game. This is all going to be internally set inside the inventory component. And then finally for the index, U property, blueprint read only, and visible anywhere. So there we go. Blueprint read only, again, we don't want to make any mistakes with this. We don't want to be able to override it into blueprints. And so there we go. We now have our struct in place. So before we build it, we need to go ahead and take care of our constructor here. Right now it's telling us we need to implement the function for this, but we don't have a CPP. So how do we do that? Well, we need to come out here outside of this struct block in here, and I'm going to do another force inline F inventory item : and then F inventory item, and then open it up with the parentheses, and there we go. Our constructor is now in place. And if you want to do anything with this, what this is going to do is whenever we create a instance of this struct, it's going to run this constructor. Now, we're not going to do anything special in here because we're going to have to handle this elsewhere. We already got some defaults put in here, but we're going to actually have to handle how to populate this struct in the inventory component. So with that, let's go ahead and head on over to the inventory component. All right, so let's go ahead and create a few variables that we're going to end up needing. I'm going to create a public section here, and the first one, we're going to do an A character, make it a pointer, and we're going to call it character. I'm going to initialize it to null pointer. This will need to be a U property. We're going to give it blueprint read only, make it visible anywhere, and give it a category called inventory pipe references. Next one, let's do a T array of type F inventory item, which is going to be the struct that we just created. And here we have the option again to include it or give it a forward declaration. We can go ahead and actually include this here. The struct is extremely small. I'm not too worried about the size of it. And I'm going to name this array inventory items. And I got the squiggly lines because I didn't camel case it here. There we go. And again, we need a U property, blueprint read write, edit anywhere. And I'm going to give it a category of inventory pipe items. And again, if you're not sure of where we're getting this from, go ahead and open up your editor. And if you open up your inventory component, you're going to see here, we got the three variables: capacity, which is an integer; items, which is F inventory struct, it's an array, you can see that right there. And then we got the B as hotbar. I'm not going to include this time. We're gonna, if and when I end up doing a hotbar, I'll probably end up handling it a little bit different, so I'm going to exclude that from here. But we've got these two that we need to set up that we did just set up. So if you head back in the IDE, then we're going to come down here and create a protected section. And in this protected section, this is a new one that isn't there. We're going to call this a T subclass of U base item. I'll explain this in just a second. U base item, and we're going to call this one default blueprint base item, and we're going to initialize it with a null pointer. So what this is we are going to create a blueprint variable or a blueprint child of this class. And we're going to need this here because in blueprints, we can't look back on the C++ as a default in our struct item. We got to have a blueprint in there for the way that I code this moving forward. We need the blueprint in there. So by making a T subclass of a U base item, we're now going to have this property. Once we expose it with the U property, we're going to have this available in blueprints in our inventory component. And we will need to set this with its blueprint equivalent, with its blueprint child class of the U base item. So the U base item in C++ will define the blueprint just like with everything else we're doing, but we will need that blueprint class. So that's what this is going to do here. So let's go ahead and create a U property for this now. I'm going to give it edit anywhere and a category of inventory items defaults. And then lastly, I'm going to create a private section, and we're going to go int 32, and here is our capacity, and we will initialize it with I'm going to do mine with the default 10. Again, this is how many items your inventory is going to default, how many slots you're going to have available in your inventory. This should be probably changed depending on how you want to start your game. I'll probably only start mine with a couple inventory slots, and then you got to like find a backpack or something to increase your capacity. But with that, we need to expose this as well, so we can change that in Blueprint. So I'm going to go U property, Blueprint read only. Okay, now that just means we can't set it in a Blueprint code. And actually, I do want to set this in Blueprint because, like I said, if you pick up a backpack, I want to be able to set this. So we will do read write, edit anywhere, and category, inventory, items, defaults. And because it is private, we need to, and that we want to expose it to read and write, we need to go meta equals allow private access equals true. And there we go. So there is one other function. If you go back into the editor and you look at the begin play of the inventory component, you can see what we're doing in here is we are resizing our variable or our array, our items array, to be the size of capacity. And then we're looping over that array and we're setting some default values. So what I want to do is I want to go ahead and create this as a separate function that we can put separately from all this. Actually right here, this will be in a separate function. I just want this to be in the begin play, and then we'll call this function in the begin play. Okay, so head back into the IDE now, and I'm going to come down here now into my functions. And again, you can organize this however you want. I like to separate my methods, or my variables, excuse me, up on top, and then down on bottom, I put in all my functions. So in the private section, I'm going to go void set up inventory struct. We don't need any parameters for this, and it's private because we don't want any other function or child function calling this. This is just going to be called on begin play, and we could put this in begin play, but I wanted to separate this out. So we've got this. Now we can go ahead and create the definition. And one thing I want to do here is I want to eliminate tick. So since we're in here in the source file now of our inventory component, I'm going to delete this, the tick component. I'm going to come up here in the constructor where it says can ever tick true. I want to make this can ever tick false. And then I'm going to come back out here real quick to the header, and I'm going to remove the tick function from the header. All right, we don't need this to tick. So we will end up doing some other things in here. We need a timer on. We'll talk about that probably in the next episode, but let's head back over into the source file for the inventory component. So like we showed in the begin play, what we need to do is we need to resize our item array. So let's call this inventory items dot set num. Now in Blueprint, you saw it was called resize, but in C++ it's called set num. It's setting the number of allowable spaces. You can see right there, it says resize as array to a given number of elements. So we want set num, and then we want to set it to the current capacity. And then right after this, we will call the function setup inventory struct. Okay, now there is one other thing that I want to do in here. Because we are creating the default Blueprint base item, we need to have it set up within the game. If we don't have it set up in the before we play the game, then we're going to have some major issues. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a little check here to ensure that we have set the default Blueprint base item in every inventory component. So now this is something you're going to have to do when you take your inventory component and you put it on your storage units, anything like that. You're going to have to end up changing this and making sure that you update this variable every time you start a new instance of this. Okay, otherwise you'll end up having a crash. So and reason why I say crash, and it's actually not a crash. Normally what you would do is you would run a check here. Okay, but I don't want to run a check because it hard crashes the editor and everything, and it drives me crazy. So I don't usually run a check if I don't have to, but you should have something. You should be able to handle your errors, right? So with this, we know if we don't have the default Blueprint base item set, then it's going to create bugs for us or errors down the road. So we're gonna handle that exception here. So when our inventory component starts, we need to go ensure MSGF. So this is like a check function, but it's not going to be a hard crash. And the MSGF, that allows us to incorporate a message that's going to get read into the log. So you'll be able to see this in your output log when the game, and it's not going to crash the game, but we're going to actually cause the game to quit. So you'll see here in just a second. So with this, we're going to go default Blueprint base item is not equal to null pointer. So if the default Blueprint base item is not equal to null pointer, then we want to run this text message. Now that seems a little bit backwards. It did to me for a while too, but this is the correct way to do this. Is it has to be not equal null pointer. And if it is equal to, so if this is true, right? So if it's not equal to null pointer, then it just passes out of the ensure message. But if it is true, or if it is not true, therefore it is null pointer, then it runs this text message, which we will just say you must set a default blueprint base item in the inventory component, and that function call. And then with that, we will go if not default base item. We'll go get the A player controller, pointer player controller equals get world. And we want to call the function get first player controller and then end. So now that we got the player controller, we're going to call Kismet system library. And you can see it right there. It kind of stuttered. It added the include at the top for me, so make sure you add that include yourself. And then we want to call the function quit game. All right, now with quit game, you can see there we need a world context object, a player controller. We need to identify the enumeration and then give it a quit preference. So let's go with the get world. This is our world object. We will give it the player controller we just created. And then we will go quit preference, and it will be the type. Will go ahead and choose quit, and then we will go true, which is the ignore platform restrictions. All right, and that will automatically, so what we're doing here, again, we're going to run this message. If this function of code generates a false, then it's going to run this, and we're going to pop this message into the output log, and then we're going to come in here, and because this ended up being producing this error, so we do not have the blueprint base item class, then you're going to come in here, we're going to get the player controller really quick, and then we're going to call use Kismet system library in order to quit the game. And then the game is just going to shut down, but it'll be a soft one. It's going to keep your editor open, so if all of a sudden you play the game and it's like, okay, why isn't the game playing? Then look into your output log and you should see this message there. So with that, and you'll probably see a couple more errors in there, but it will show up in there. Now you can see we got the red squiggly lines right here. The reason why we got that is because we have not implemented this. Base item is incomplete. So I come over here and I click this and I got include the definition. So I'll do that. And it pops this up here, the include for me. And there we go. So now we got that all working. Let's go ahead and set up the setup inventory struct function. And this one will be fairly easy, but we're going to go ahead and run our loop in here. So before we run our loop, we need to create a counter. We could do a traditional for loop and it would have a counter in there, but I'm going to just do it this way. I'm going to show you guys that how to do a for each loop. There is not technically a for each loop in Unreal C++, but what we're going to do is we're going to go for. So if you start to, at least for me, I'm not sure if it does this in Visual Studios, I can start to type for each, and it looks like there is a for each loop in there. But once you select that, this is what we're going to be presented with. So we're going to get a for loop. All right. Now this this is the type of element that we're going to be looking for within this loop. This would be here in the editor on the for each loop. This is what it would be here. So this particular one, we have an array element of the F inventory item struct. So this is the element. You can see there it says array element, and then back in code you can see here element. So it's populating the auto. If we knew exactly what it would be, we could just do, so if we were just doing going through an array of integers, then we would change that. You want to use the auto keyword as little as possible because there is some overhead to it, but for small things like this, you're all right doing it, or where we have an array that is mixed information within there. Okay, so we're going to leave this as auto, but I'm going to go ahead and add the dereference variable right there. So we're going to go auto dereference the element. You can change this to whatever you want. This is what you're going to use inside. So if I went item, I can call this item if I want to, that's fine. And then the collection, this is what we want to iterate over. So if we go again back into the editor, this is the collection where it says array. This is your collection. So whatever you're plugging into the for each loop is what you're going to get. The only difference here is we don't have the array index. So that's why we created the counters. We don't get this within the for each loop. So we're going to do this ourselves. All right, so this collection will be the inventory items, and there we go. So now we're going to cycle through the inventory items. Everything that comes off is going to be called items, and we're running the auto type of the item as it comes through. Okay, so this first one, we're going to go item dot owning inventory equals this. So this inventory component that is running this function will become the owner. Then we will go item dot base item equals default blueprint base item. So this is why we ran that check and we quit the game before we call this function. Otherwise, we'll end up populating some bad stuff, some bad information here into each array element here. And then lastly, we will go item dot index equals counter, and then just to ensure that we get a different index every time. And notice we started the counter at 0. That's because arrays have a default index of 0 to be the first one, and then we will go counter plus plus. That way every time we iterate through, we will increment this just like so. All right, so the last thing I want to do before we go test this out into in the editor is I want to come back over here to the base item.h, and we will start to do a little bit of work on this in the next episode. We'll start putting some of the values and stuff in here in the next episode. But first, what we need to do is we need to come up here to the u class macro here, and I'm going to declare this as abstract. All right, you can read right there if you don't understand what abstract is. And then I'm going to make this of blueprint blueprintable. What this blueprintable means is it exposes a class as an acceptable base class for creating blueprints. So in other words, when you're creating a blueprint and you go to the other classes in there, you can actually have this now to create a new class based off of this, which is exactly what we want. Without this keyword, you will not be able to make blueprints of this class. So blueprintable, and there we go. So now go ahead and build your project and head on into the editor. All right, so now if I come over here to the player character, I'm going to jump into the viewport just to get this view. But you can see here, we've got the new inventory component that we added. We can edit it in C++. I can click this and it'll open it up in the IDE over in Writer. And here is our general one that we have. So what I'm going to do is, first thing, I'm going to come over here into my event graph, and just so I can start working with my new component, I'm going to go ahead and remove some of these functionalities because we haven't hooked this up yet. So I'm going to come in here and I'm just going to unhook some of the input actions that we have here. So that way, when I push tab, it's not going to activate this code here, right? We're going to wait until we produce the C++ code, but I don't want to remove all this because we're going to need to come back and review this when we're building up the C++ classes. So I'm going to come in here. I'm not going to do this where it says event drop. I'm just going to come down here to any of the input actions and just remove those. Then here, since I got 3 coming off of here, I'm just going to create some reroute nodes so that way I know where they're at, where these go when we hook it back up. And when I disconnect these, you can see these pins kind of disappear. I'm just going to expand it back out so I know where these get plugged into when I go to hook it back up, just like that. Okay, so that way now I don't call this. Everything should now be running off of our main inventory component, and I can delete that one if I want to. But here, let's go ahead and compile it now. So now if we press play, see what happens. Well, seemingly nothing happened, right? We press play again and it kind of snapped there a little bit. So what happened? Well, if we open up our output log, you can come in here now and scroll up a little bit and you're going to see we got some errors in here. So if we just follow it back up here to the beginning, you can see the ensure condition failed, right? Handled and ensure. This is the start of the error. So our ensure kicked in. Ensure condition filled, blueprintable, blue base item, not equal to null pointer. This tells you where it's at, line 19. Then we come down here. Now it says you must set a default blueprint base item in the inventory component, because that's what we said. And then it comes through the call stack. And like I said, you're going to get a few more errors in here because it was trying to start up some things that it was trying to finish up the begin play and it didn't. So all this will clear up once we fix that, right? So if we come back now into the player character, we select our inventory and come down here to references, items, defaults, default blueprint base item. So we have nothing we can select here, right? So we need to create a blueprint class. So go ahead and open up your content browser. So now we come down to the plugin folder. And if you remember before, I discussed the content folder here. So I'm going to select the content folder and I want to incorporate this blueprint, or what I'm going to create here, which will be a blueprint base class of the base item. I want to include this with the plugin. So I'm going to put this in that content folder of the plugin. So now when you package the plugin to move around, sell, whatever you're going to do with it, this will be included with that. That's how important this file is. So I'm going to go right click and I'm going to create a, notice we can't do a C++ class in here. This is for content. If you want C++, you have to go into that folder, but we don't want that. We want to go blueprint. So now we go all classes. So if we start to type base item, you can see here now this is the BP base item. This is our original. We don't want that. We want this one. This is from C++. So I'm going to select that and I'm going to rename this BP underscore base item. And it might be a little bit confusing because, you know, we've already got a BP base item, but this will be fine for now. If you want to call this BP base item new, something like that, then you can. I'm just going to go ahead and mark this for add in my revision. There we go. So now we don't need to do anything with this at this point. If we come back now to our inventory and we come over here to default blueprint base item, we should have access now to the BP base item. Now I can feel confident knowing that this is the one that we need, because when we created this variable in C++, we made it of the type base item made from C++. So it's got to be from the C++ class, not from blueprint. So that's why we don't have that other one in here. This is from the blueprint base class. So now that we have that, we can compile it. Now we should be able to play without it crashing. There we go. And if we exit out of this, open up our output log and scroll back down, I should have probably cleared my output log, but you can see since that last error, we didn't get any other errors. We ran just perfectly fine. Everything loaded up, and that's it. As always, I hope you guys found this useful. Hope you guys are getting a little bit excited as we start to get in here and get more in depth into the C++. If you're new to the channel, go down, hit that subscribe button. While you're down there subscribing, hit that like button. If you got any questions, leave me some comments down below. Or you can head on over into the Discord, ask your questions on over there, meet the community, be a part of the community. And until the next one, peace.